What up, YouTube? Let's here again. Thanks for visiting the channel. I appreciate it. Tonight, I'm going to do something a little different. I needed to take apart and clean up one of my PM2s. I haven't done that in a little while, so figured I'd just upload it on a video for you guys, just in case anybody's wondering how to take apart a PM2. I think it's a pretty good knife to start off with, if you're just getting into the knife community, and it's just a nice easy knife to take apart and put back together. There can be a couple of parts that can be a little bit frustrating. I'll go over those here in just a few minutes, but everybody loves this knife. A lot of the times when it comes from the factory, you can just push the compression lock and the blade just falls straight down into the handle. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of people think that you have to just give some time to break in or possibly loosen up the hardware a little bit if it's too tight when they get it. And sometimes that is the case, but other times it's just a matter of making some adjustments to the screws. Actually, all 6 of the screws on this guy will affect the way the pivot acts. Even if you tighten or loosen these guys back here, it can tighten or loosen the pivot all the way at the front of the blade, which I thought was strange, but that seems to be the case. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started on taking this thing apart. If you guys have any questions or anything about the video, just send a comment or a message and I'll get back to you. So sometimes people have a preference whether they start with the pivot or they start with the body screws. I don't really think it makes a difference one way or the other, so I usually just start where I start. Sorry about the lighting issues here. I got some shadows and stuff. I'm working on that. That's something that I'm going to try to get taken care of by the end of the week here. So bear with me, as I've asked a few times so far. This driver that I'm using here, got it from a company called Good Screw. It's spelled Goodscrew. They sell a whole bunch of different kinds of drivers. They've got brass and copper, titanium, zirconium, a whole wide variety of stuff you can get from them. And they're really, really cool. Easy to get a good grip on when you're using it. And the top part works really, really well as a fidget spinner as well. It seems like it might be a little too tight. Sometimes these screws will get stuck in these standoffs, and it just takes a little bit of doing to get it to come out. I always like to make sure that I have a magnetic bowl here with me just to keep everything together, so stuff doesn't go rolling around or anything like that. There's also some other stuff that I keep with me when I'm doing my disassemblies that some people might think is a little bit crazy. Like I've got a toothbrush here, some little swabs that you can use to clean out the standoffs and everything. Those come in pretty handy. Now, one of the bigger issues that people have when they're disassembling this guy is getting the lanyard barrel out. Sometimes those are pretty tight in there and it's hard to get them out. This one's snug. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's super tight, but I'm going to show you a little trick here that you can use to get that out of there if you need to. Just make sure you keep everything all together. So sometimes people use pens, sometimes people use toothbrush like me. It all depends. But if you're having trouble getting this lanyard barrel out, most of the time all you have to do is just kind of lift up a little bit on the liner, excuse me, and then you can slide this under here and just slide it forward, and make sure you go slow and be careful, obviously, so you don't break anything, but that will usually help you to pop that right out of there. Sometimes it takes a little jiggling back and forth. There you go. Okay, so now that we've got that all apart, First thing I do is just clean everything off, make sure everything's nice and dry, there's no gunk everywhere, especially in the washers, because those are one of the most important parts. Some people like to run theirs dry, some people like to run theirs with oil. I like to use a little bit of lube, not a whole lot. I find when it comes to lubrication and both lubrication and Loctite, I find that less is more. I was for a long time using the Loctite stick, which is more of a paste than a liquid, and I found with that stuff, you know, if I put it on as small a part of the screw as I possibly could, and my general rule for myself was that if you can't see the threads, you've got too much Loctite on there. You should just have enough to fill up a very small portion of the threads, but not so much that it covers the threads. Excuse me. So if you put way too much Loctite on a screw or something like that, it will cake up inside of the standoff or the pivot or wherever you have it, and then it can actually gunk that area up and make it harder to use that part of the knife. It can actually seize up some pivots. I've actually seen that happen before with a friend of mine's knife. He went way too crazy with the Loctite and ended up just completely seizing up his pivot. I also like to have these little swabs here. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you use, just you want to be able to clean out all the little tiny areas of your knife, making sure that there's no buildup anywhere, because even if it's just a small amount of buildup, it adds up. And like I said before, I'm a little bit crazy when it comes to my knives. Cleanliness is next to godliness, you know what they say. So I just try to make sure that I have everything as cleaned up as possible before I start putting everything back together again. You know, the 7 P's of life: proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. I'm sure everybody's heard that before, right? Probably not. Sorry. I got a weird sense of humor. Okay. Get that off of there. Got that. No. Some other stuff I like to have. Just tweezers, or you know, something small that you can use for delicate work. A small pair of needle nose pliers in case you need those. I always have my multi-tool with me just for fun, and I also keep a pair of needle nose vice grips just in case something's seized up or anything like that. Now, if you ever have to use something like this, obviously you want to be really, really careful. Anytime I have to use this, I'll take my rag or whatever I have on hand. I'll just cover up the teeth on there, and then, you know, grab a hold of whatever I have to grab a hold of, and then do what I got to do. Same thing with the pliers, but that's common sense. Most people should know that. If not, you know, just take it with a grain of salt. You know what it is. Not everybody knows everything. So once you have everything as far as the blade and the handle are concerned completely cleaned off, make sure you don't have any issues with the pivot. It's got a little bit of lube on it, so that's good. You just want to make sure that there's nothing building up in there. I also like to make sure I have a nice bright light while I'm working, just so that I can use that to see through all the small areas of the knife. In case something's building up in there, you can see it a lot easier that way. Okay, so now for the hardware. I've got this little tool that I use. I used to actually, I am a nurse. I used to work in an operating room, so I've got a few medical tools that I use to do this. It helps me to get a hold of very delicate objects and hold on to them pretty tightly so I can aggressively clean them off. And I always try to get into these little standoffs with these swabs as much as possible, just to try to get as much dust and dirt and any Loctite left behind. I like to try to get that out of there. Like I said, I'm a little bit neurotic when it comes to doing this, so bear with me. I know it takes a while. Most people probably can clean this knife in less than 10 or 15 minutes. So here's, I just want to show you this if I can. So there was a piece of something just that popped out of there. I'm not sure what it was, but it was pretty much blocking the entire opening for this standoff, which is kind of why I do that. Just to make sure I get out as much out of there as I possibly can. All right, so here's my little tool. It's kind of like a surgical tool. We just call these forceps or whatever you want to call them. But this allows me to get a pretty good grip way towards the head of the screw here, and clamp down on it so that it doesn't go anywhere. And then I can use that to hold on to while I really clean this screw off and get all that Loctite out of there and dust and dirt, everything like that. This is not a necessary step. It's just something that I have to do for my own sanity, I guess you would call it. Not that there's a whole lot of that left. The body screws aren't usually that big of a deal. If those have a little bit of stuff left on, that's, it's not the end of the world to me. It's the pivot screws mostly is what I'm concerned about. I don't necessarily know that it would affect the pivot very much if it had a little bit of gunk in it, but I don't like to take any chances, so that's why I'm so ridiculous when it comes to cleaning literally every part of the knife. If you ever are going to use something like this, something that clamps down and keeps constant pressure on this fastener while you're doing this, and you're not holding on to it yourself, once you do clamp down on it, give it a couple of tugs just to make sure that it's in there, good and secure, and it's not going to go flying at any given moment. You definitely don't want that. And it's a much higher possibility that that's going to happen when you're, whacking on it with a toothbrush like I am. But, see, that was all full of crap a second ago, and now it's completely clean, so that's great. That makes me happy. So, once you have these cleaned off, you can go ahead and get ready to start putting your knife back together. Now, taking it apart isn't that big of a deal. Like I said, the only thing I really had to show you there was to try to use something to push that liner up a little bit to get that lanyard tube out of there. Putting it back together, on the other hand, is a little bit of a process for me. Not everybody does it the same way, obviously, but I have a step-by-step process that I like to go through just to make myself feel better. Okay, so the easiest way to know how to do this is you got this little cutout here. That is for the compression lock, so that's how you know that this liner goes here and this liner goes here. Once you have these back together, it is beneficial to take everything on one side and reattach it. It just makes everything a whole lot easier. Still my T8, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you guys. So you need the T8 for the body screws, you need a T10 for the pivot. So you get that on there, hold on to it with a fingernail. This is a different kind of Loctite that I've decided to start using a couple of weeks ago. Let me see, what is this? It just says thread locker orange Permatex, Permatex. It's high strength orange. So it's the same as red, only you're able to remove it by hand, which is awesome. So if anybody's new and you don't know what thread locker is or Loctite or anything like that, Loctite is a compound that you can put on your screws. It's either a liquid or a paste. And when you screw this in here, I try not to put that in too tight. Never put anything in too tight. That's another thing. So anyway, when you're putting your screws in, you put a little bit of this on there, and then when that dries, it hardens, and it makes it so that vibrations and movement general use doesn't cause your screws to back out on their own. There are two different kinds normally. There's red and there's blue. Red Loctite is permanent. You have to use a heat gun or something to get that stuff out, or to get a screw out that has that on there. The blue is not quite as aggressive. The drawback is it doesn't always work as well as it's supposed to, in my experience. So I found this stuff here, which is orange thread locker. Never heard of it before, but it says that it's the same as red thread locker, only you can take it off by hand. So I've been using it for about 2 weeks now, and it seems to work really, really well. The only thing is, again, less is more. A dab will do ya. But when you put that into the screw, the displacement sometimes pushes the fluid up out of the screw well. So I like to try to get that out of there with a toothbrush, just because if you leave it there and let it dry, it gets all flaky, and then that's just freaking gross. All right, so next step. The next thing you're going to need is your PV washers. Once you get your first PV washer in, then you want to put on your pivot. The pivot is a D-shaped pivot. I don't know if you can see that here, but see if I can get an angle so that you can see it here. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to. Maybe right there. So there's a straight line right here on this edge, which will match up with the pivot, which is right here. So that's the only way the pivot will go into this hole. This hole is round, but this one has a D-shaped hole on it. I always want to start off with just a pinch of oil on each side. And you want to make sure that the polished edge of the washer is facing up towards the blade. Don't worry about it if you get oil everywhere. It's, you can always wipe that up. So line up that D-shaped area, and that should fall straight into that well there. So once you have that ready to go, you grab one of your pivot screws. I'm sorry, another thing I didn't mention. With the standoffs, there's a tall standoff and a short standoff. The tall standoff goes in front of the knife, the short standoff goes in the back. I'm sure you could probably figure that out on your own, but figured I'd let you know just in case. Something else you guys might notice, I have a benign tremor, so I shake a lot. It's not anything to do with any kind of physical health issues or anything like that. It's just something I've lived with my whole life, so not to worry there. All right, so once you have the washer on, you have the pivot on, you want to put your lanyard barrel in there if it'll fit. And then you got these two guys in here, you can put the blade in. One of the biggest thing I tell people is if there's anything you forget, just don't forget this part, because this also works as it's a standoff, but it also works as the stop pin for the blade. So you can put this in here and not have to worry about it running up and smacking into one of the other metallic pieces, because it'll stop it right there. All right, so everything is reassembled. 90% of the time, this liner will not come out if you turn it upside down, but with this one it does, of course. So hold on to that part while you're putting it back on top here. Sometimes I can, yeah, no, that's pretty loose. Most of my other knives will not do that. So just make sure you get on the lanyard barrel there and get it onto the pivot. As long as everything lines up, it should look fine. Now, when you take your hands off of this, it's kind of like a spring-loaded type thing because of that compression lock there. That's fine. Just be careful. If you take your hand off too fast, it'll go flying, so don't do anything crazy. Still got my T10 on here. Yes. All right, so once I have everything back together, I like to put the pivot on first. I don't know why that is. It might make a difference, it might not. I kind of feel like it stabilizes the washers and the pivot and everything, keeps them from going anywhere. So I always like to put that in first. As I said before, I always try to make sure I don't put anything in too tight. Now, I don't know if you can see here, but once I put screws into the holes, I will turn it back until you feel a click. And then that's when you know that you're in the track. If you start to turn the screw and it hesitates and it gets harder and harder every time you try to turn it, don't go too far. Just back it out, because that means you're about to strip the screw, which is no bueno. It's kind of hard to get extra hardware for certain knives. It's not very hard for this one, but it can be for other knives. So why didn't you guys stop me? I forgot to put my other washer on because I'm stupid. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes, right? Easy peasy. Okay. A little bit more oil. Whoops. Okay, so there's still some thread locker in there. I'm not going to put any more on there. There we go. Now, again, once you get that screw into the hole, turn it so you hear that click. And then screw that puppy in. All right. Now I can go to the body screws. One of the biggest culprits as far as stopping up the blade itself is this guy right here. I feel like the screw's turning it. There we go. So if you make this too tight, that will actually stop the pivot from working properly. You know, you're going to feel it's like it's the pivot screws, but the pivot screws will either be perfectly fine or they'll be loose or, you know, whatever. You don't need to really mess with those, but there are people that will just over and over and over again, they'll loosen them up, tighten them up, go over and over and over, and all they really need to do is either loosen up, or, you know, these screws just a little bit, and that will make it so that the pivot will work properly. Now this is probably going to be tight. It's actually not that bad. Yeah, that's not bad at all, but it could be a little looser. Okay, so in a situation like that, zero blade replay. So if it feels a little tight and you can feel just a tiny bit of blade play, these could actually be tightened down a little bit more, and what you need to do is loosen these guys up just a little bit. If there is no blade play, then those are tight enough. So there isn't any blade play at all there. These maybe could be loosened up just a little bit. I try to be careful with that, because if you loosen them up too much, obviously then you'll have some blade play, which is never good. Nobody likes blade play. All right, perfect. Yeah, nice and solid. And it's fallen shut. Good. Okay, that's everything I've got. And once I'm done here, you know, like I said, I scrape out these screw holes with the toothbrush just a little bit to get any Loctite out of there that might be there. I'll wipe everything down with a cloth, and then we're all done. So that's everything I've got for you guys tonight. If there's any, as I said, if there's any questions or anything, just send me a comment or send me a message. Thank you guys for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys have a good evening. You guys take care. Bye.